We started our trip off with a visit to the International Civil Rights Center and Museum in downtown Greensboro to kind of contextualize our trip for us. We learned a lot about the history of the Greensboro sit-in movement. We're basically a group of 4 freshmen at the local HBCU, North Carolina A&T, came to the segregated Woolworth's lunch counter in downtown Greensboro, and their actions that day kind of sparked this nationwide movement that over 2 or 3 years led to the desegregation of lunch counters at large.
Our movie theater, we couldn't come to this movie. We could come, but we had to sit upstairs. And we had to come through an entrance on the back side. We didn't come through this door. And we couldn't eat in the restaurants, as you know. So basically, all we could do when we walked by, we had to just look through the window. And then the 4 guys from A&T demonstrated the rule. Yeah. So once they started those demonstrations and other cities joined in, then, they opened it up. But it wasn't a quick thing, probably 2.5 years it took. Just like these kids that's in Florida and they're demonstrating against gun rights. As you see, it won't happen right then, but if they persevere, it will happen.
There's nuances between every city in North Carolina, and today you happen to be in one of the more progressive locations where you're going to see more people speaking out about monuments and statues. And I find it interesting, if the statue behind us is Nathaniel Greene, now we're talking about Revolutionary War here, and Nathaniel Greene was a slave owner. And so, where do you draw the line on that and say, okay, this is an appropriate or this is not an appropriate statue to have up? And so you have kind of 2 combating opinions, and ultimately you see a lot of movement down here, especially when it's charged by movements in other areas locally, like Charlottesville.
After hearing from people in downtown Greensboro, we went to the alma mater of the Greensboro 4, North Carolina A&T.
Okay, now this sounds terrible, but I have to be completely honest. I feel like PWIs and the black students, and even non-black students, they can protest. I don't feel like historically black colleges and universities do have as many protests or are even really allowed to protest the same way. After my undergrad, I plan on going to a different university. I don't want to go to another HBCU, but I think it's very important to go to one. I think it's very different to come from, being the only one to being in a room full of people that look like you. Yeah. And I feel like it's embracing at the same time. People have to understand, I learned that it's not always embracing. People of your same group are going to knock you down the same way that someone else is.
Have you seen, I guess in your community and in Mississippi, a change either since Trump's election or since the alt-right movement?
To be honest, the racial tension has gotten a little bit worse because now people feel they can talk to you and do whatever they feel like, you know what I'm saying? Like I say, my town is already a town that is built on racism. You know what I'm saying? I walked in the store a few weeks ago and somebody wouldn't sell me a bag of chips.
Yeah.
It is what it is, right? But I don't have to spend my money with you. We are still fighting the fight that was left from the people that started the civil rights. Everybody's going to look at everything with a different point of view. So, some may say, well, I don't like it because it represents slaves, you know what I'm saying? But, hey, if you're from the South, it's still a part of you.
Heritage.
Yeah. So you can't forget about it.
The way that we pretty much embrace our own history is, first of all, by learning by it. We have these monuments up, we name them after buildings, and then people ask about it, and then when we actually get here, say New Student Orientation, we learn about these basic things because, like I said before, it's what made A&T. Yeah. The Confederate flag, 9 times out of 10, they're gonna give you a BS excuse on why they fly the flag, saying, oh, it's no different than the American flag. It's a democracy. We can do whatever we want. But the reality of it is, you still supporting a cause that's dead, that died because people are trying to fight for freedom other than prejudice, fighting for love instead of hate. And that's what that flag represents. Just like the Nazi flag that I'm seeing these supremacists walking around with in 2018. And I remember this well, Trump's presidency, a month after, down at downtown Greensboro, we see like bags of rice and rocks, and it has labeled literally a warning by the Ku Klux Klan. He's president and he's at the top. That leads everybody to think that, oh, it's okay, oh, I can do this, oh, I can do that, I can get away with this because of my privilege or whatever. And it's just like, it's not that racism is coming back, because it was always here. It's just that people are actually being out about it.
So after Greensboro, we went to Mount Airy, North Carolina to stay with one of Tom's family friends for the night. And the woman who we stayed with was named Bonnie. And she was a very interesting woman with a varied background. She grew up in a very conservative part of Louisiana, then moved to the Bay Area. Then she moved back to a very conservative part of the country in Mount Airy, North Carolina, which just a few years ago had seen, this massive Klan rally. The next day, we drove down to Atlanta to interview students at Morehouse and Spelman colleges about these same issues. Unfortunately, we were denied entrance from Spelman College because there had been a hate crime where somebody threw a brick with a racist message through somebody's window, so the security was very defensive.
In terms of the election, have you seen any changes in racial tension, with Trump rising to president? Yeah.
I gotta say, I have seen more racial tensions. I've seen more separations between blacks and whites than anything.
Not too much of a change. Obviously, you get the news and stuff, but me being here, not too big of a change. It's like take down this, take down that, change this name, change that name. But people don't realize that it's already been ingrained. We have maybe almost 100 years of this. So it's not good, but to change it would probably just not make things better.
I grew up in a predominantly white institutions. I went to private schools my whole life. I wasn't really too aware of the racial problems because it was kind of kept away from me. But as soon as I came here, I guess I started to see it more.
That night, we stayed with my dad's friends from work, Kelly and Malik. Kelly's mom actually went to North Carolina A&T around the time the Greensboro Four started their sit-in movement. So we had a lot of interesting conversation with her and the rest of her family, and overall it was a great time. The next day we went to a graveyard in Roswell, Georgia, which is a more conservative suburb of Atlanta, to look for Confederate memorabilia. This was the one flag that we found. Afterwards, we interviewed two women at a historical plantation nearby.
I think it's valuable to understand that in the context of the time, this was their way of life, this was their way of living on both sides, on the landowner sides and also on the side of those people who worked for the landowners, including the slaves.
What's your opinion on public statues of Confederate soldiers and stuff like that?
We're laughing because we were talking about this morning.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Let's face it, it was two different cultures, the North and the South. And when cultures go to war, there are people who it's important to remember for that particular culture, that their culture and their ideas be preserved. I don't think that those particular war heroes incite in this day and time negativity or anger or hatred toward another people.
I think that those statues help me to look deeper into what the Civil War was about. And again, it's not that I wasn't taught that, it's just that you're really more immersed in it, and I think it brings much more dialogue. But I think if we get rid of all of these things, we'll be losing part of our history.
The unfortunate thing about the Confederate flag is that it's been so connected to the identity of the Ku Klux Klan. And obviously I'm not a Black American, although I can have enough empathy to understand that the terror which must come into the hearts of the African American community as they see, hoods or burning crosses or the Confederate flag.
After visiting the plantation, we went to Emory University to interview Reverend Dr. Robert Franklin, who is the chair of moral leadership and a senior advisor to Emory's president, about these very same issues.
There's a wonderful observation by the French commentator of the 19th century, Alexis de Tocqueville, and he says something that I've always appreciated and repeated. He says, the greatness of America lies not in being more enlightened than any other nation, but in her ability to repair her faults. We're at a time of testing. There were tensions and challenges in the American body politic that perhaps people were ignoring, that the current president articulated and seemed to embody, and it was important for America to understand that. And yet, I think he could have done that and could do that without the means, what I characterize as mean-spirited, polarizing way in which he does it. I think the American people are resilient, our institutions are strong and resilient, and back to de Tocqueville, we will repair whatever damage occurs during this period. On one hand, remembering our ancestors and celebrating their lives, their sacrifice, their death. On the other hand, a symbol of hate, exclusion, oppression, and slavery. And so each community, I think, has to sort out, work out how we do one, remember those in the past who may have had virtuous qualities in other areas of their life, but at the same time condemn the system. I think that clearly when a building is named, when a monument is erected and placed on display, it conveys the society's approval. So let's figure out a more thoughtful way. At the end of the day, this is America, and because that Constitution and the moral ideals that surround it are kind of hover above all of our heads, Americans can repair their faults.
After interviewing Dr. Franklin, we traveled back through Atlanta to interview Bob Barker, a conservative corporate lawyer at Coca-Cola, on the same topics, as well as economic inequality in America.
This idea of attacking a statue, I mean, they don't attack statues of Mao in China. Why have we suddenly decided that we're so post-civilization that we can decide which statues we want? We created enormous strides in terms of black inequality, but we did it from 1864 to 1964. And then we started going backwards. There is no policy that the Democrats support that does not involve more federal spending on some bigger program. There's nothing out there. So the only thing you have left to build a coalition with is identity politics. Whenever you start redistributing wealth in any society, you're basically creating a system of entitlements. It created this mentality that people no longer had to adjust to the society, that it was up to society to adjust to them. They're told that they can't work themselves into a situation where they can make their lives better. If you want to give them hope in a job. Give them hope in a system whereby they feel like they can control themselves, not that they're reliant on somebody else for their livelihood or for their very existence. And that's what America is all about.
After hearing from Mr. Barker, we stayed in suburban Atlanta with my mom's cousin, Mary Jo, and her husband, Gray. Gray is a friend of Bob Barker's and a professor at Duke. Our dialogue was fascinating. The next day, we traveled to Columbus, Georgia to view a death penalty case that was appealing for a retrial on the basis of racial discrimination in the jury selection. We couldn't film for obvious reasons, but it was a unique experience. After the case, we made a quick stop in Alabama and then began the long journey home.